The room was silent the moment the sentence left the speaker's lips. No shouting, no threats, just a calm, measured voice. Yet something shifted, shoulders tensed, eyes widened. A few people nodded without knowing why. Nothing touched them, but something inside had already moved. This is how modern spells work. We no longer gather in candlelit chambers whispering in dead languages. Today's magic wears a cleaner face. It lives in headlines, speeches, warnings, and the subtle hint of one more thing you should know. Words have replaced the wand. Communication has replaced ritual, and the effect is the same. Reality bends. At first glance, words seem harmless. We speak to connect, to explain, to share, but words do far more than inform. They shape perception, decide what is safe and what is dangerous, what deserves attention and what can be ignored. A single phrase can calm a crowd or ignite it. A single label can turn uncertainty into fear. This isn't metaphor. This is psychology. The human mind is not a courtroom. It is a theater. Emotion takes the stage first. Logic follows, often only to justify what fear or desire has already decided. Words slip past defenses because we evolved to trust them. Fear especially is a master key. It doesn't knock, it enters, it acts. Salary. Consider a warning label, a breaking news alert, a message that begins with what they don't want you to know. Your heart beats faster before your mind even understands. Your body reacts before your brain processes the reason. This is unconscious influence, the hidden danger of language. And now, the unsettling truth. It works on you too. Intelligence doesn't grant immunity. Awareness barely slows it down. If you breathe, if you feel, if you fear, you are reachable. If you want to uncover how this invisible magic works, how to protect your mind, and how to spot manipulation before it moves you, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share this video with anyone who values their freedom of thought. Every word around you could be a spell, if you know how to see it. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Innocent Words. The voice came through the radio just before dawn, steady, warm, almost caring. It spoke of safety, of caution, of what responsible people should do next. Outside, the city was quiet, but something subtle moved through the air, like a pressure change before a storm. By breakfast, neighbors spoke differently. By nightfall, choices had been made that no one remembered choosing. No doors were forced. No weapons drawn. Only words drifting in, settling where they pleased. That is the first illusion, that words arrive harmlessly. We are taught that communication is neutral, mere exchange, simple talking, information passing from one mouth to another. We call it just conversation, as if language were a clear window rather than a tinted lens. But communication is never neutral. It never was. The moment a word is chosen, 1,000 others are rejected. The moment a phrase is framed one way, a different reality collapses. To speak is to select. To select is to shape. At its core, communication is an act of power. Not loud power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that rearranges how things feel before it explains how they are. This is why the myth of just talking persists. Because if words were openly dangerous, we would fear them. Instead, they come wrapped in familiarity. They borrow our trust. Psychologically, this works because the mind is a pattern-seeking machine. We do not absorb language as raw data. We absorb it as meaning. Each word carries emotional weight, cultural memory, personal association. Say home and 1,000 images rise. Say threat and the body leans forward. Language does not wait for permission to enter the nervous system. It arrives already dressed in feeling. This is where perception begins to bend. When certain words are repeated, crisis normal them safety. They carve grooves in attention. What we notice changes, what we ignore becomes invisible. Identity follows close behind. People begin to describe themselves differently, align themselves differently, fear differently. Over time, they do not just think new thoughts. They become new versions of themselves, shaped quietly by language they never questioned. Consider a classroom. A teacher tells a child, "You're not a math person." It sounds casual, maybe even kind. Years later, the child avoids numbers, feels a tightening in the chest when equations appear. builds a life around that sentence. Or consider a workplace where phrases like, "That's just how it's done," circulate like stale air. Innovation dies not with resistance, but with language that makes resistance feel inappropriate. On a larger scale, the effect multiplies. A headline chooses a verb, surges, invades, collapses, and the public mood shifts, fear sharpens, anger warms, compassion cools. The facts remain unchanged, but the interpretation is sealed. This is not accidental. Language architects know this. They know that the fastest route to behavior is not logic, but emotion, especially fear. Here is a hidden truth rarely spoken aloud. Fear does not require lies to function. It only requires emphasis. Highlight one possibility. Repeat it. Give it a name that sticks. The mind fills in the rest. People begin to act as if the danger were everywhere, even when it is rare. They monitor themselves. They monitor each other. Control emerges not from force, but from shared vocabulary. Now pause, breathe, and notice something uncomfortable. You have felt this. You have changed your tone, your posture, your plans. Because of words you trusted, you have dismissed ideas because of labels attached to them. You have accepted limits that arrive disguised as descriptions. This is not weakness, it is humanity. The illusion deepens because communication often wears moral clothing. Words are framed as protection, concern, responsibility. Who would argue with safety? Who would resist carrying language? This is where the spell tightens. The more virtuous the phrasing, the less it is questioned. The more emotional the delivery, the faster it bypasses analysis. And then comes the moment, the quiet mini-climax most never notice, the instant when a thought feels like your own, even though it was planted. When a fear feels personal, even though it was shared. When an identity feels natural, even though it was suggested. Nothing dramatic happens, no alarms, just a subtle alignment between your inner world and someone else's words. That is the true power of innocent language. It doesn't command. It invites. It doesn't push. It pulls. And by the time you feel the movement, you are already part of it. So let me speak to you directly now. As you read these lines, words are shaping you. They always are. The question is not whether you are influenced, but whether you are aware. Awareness is the thin line between participation and possession. To read consciously is to feel the tug and examine it. To listen consciously is to ask not only what is being said, but what is being made to feel true. This book will not ask you to abandon language. That would be impossible. Instead, it asks you to see it, to notice its weight, its direction, its shadows. Because once the illusion of innocent words dissolves, something remarkable happens, the spell weakens. You regain the space between stimulus and response, between hearing and believing. In the end, words are neither angels nor demons. They are instruments. But instruments played without awareness can become weapons, and those who understand this have always ruled quietly. The philosopher once warned that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. If that is true, then expanding awareness of language is not an academic exercise. It is an act of liberation. To reclaim your mind, you must first reclaim the words that move it. Chapter 2. The Three Forms of Magic. The candle trembled, though there was no wind. In the old story, the magician never touched his audience. He stood still, whispered softly, and watched faces change. A thought appeared where none had existed. A certainty replaced doubt. A hand moved before the mind could object. When it was over, the room looked the same, but the people did not. This is how magic has always worked. Not by breaking reality, but by rearranging it from the inside. Communication follows the same ancient pattern. It operates through three distinct forms of magic: creation, transformation, and control. They are not metaphors, they are mechanisms. Each one leaves fingerprints on the mind. Each one is still practiced daily, often by people who do not realize they are casting spells. At its simplest, communication creates. An idea that lived in one skull crosses an invisible bridge and takes residence in another. This is no small feat. Minds are private places, locked rooms, yet language opens them. A story told becomes a story shared. A belief repeated becomes a belief multiplied. When someone says, "This is how things are," a new structure forms in the listener's reality. Creation has occurred. Psychologically, this happens because the brain treats ideas as objects. Once introduced, they can be examined, decorated, defended. Even rejected ideas leave a residue, a shadow that alters future judgment. This is why rumors linger, why first impressions endure, why a single sentence can echo for decades. Creation does not require permission, it requires exposure. But creation alone is not enough. For magic to hold, it must transform. Thought must become sound. Sound must become meaning. Meaning must become belief. This journey is alchemical. Electrical impulses fire. Muscles contract. Air vibrates. Ears translate pressure into signal. The brain assembles fragments into coherence, and emotion floods the gap. By the time the listener nods, something inert has become alive. Transformation is where neutrality dies. Tone colors meaning. Pace implies urgency. Silence suggests threat. The same words spoken gently soothe, spoken sharply they wound. Neuroscience shows that emotion binds memory tighter than logic ever could. When language carries feeling, especially fear, it embeds itself deeper, lasting longer, shaping behavior with less resistance. Consider a doctor delivering news. The facts may be identical, but the phrasing determines whether the patient feels doomed or determined. Or a parent speaking to a child at night. Be careful out there. It sounds loving, but it plants a world filled with danger. Over time, caution hardens into anxiety. Identity adjusts. The child becomes careful. Transformation is complete. Then comes the third form, the one whispered about, rarely acknowledged control. This is communication that bypasses logic entirely. It does not argue. It does not persuade openly. It triggers. It shortcuts. It moves the body before the mind can intervene. Fear is its favorite instrument. When fear enters, the brain's ancient circuitry takes command. The amygdala fires, attention narrows, time compresses, complex reasoning slows. This is efficient for survival and perfect for influence. Messages framed around threat, urgency, or loss slide past skepticism. They do not need to be accurate. They need to feel immediate. You have seen this in the wild. A breaking alert flashes red. A voice lowers and quickens. Experts warn. You may be at risk. People act. They share. They comply. They share. They comply. Later they justify. Control is not domination by force. It is guidance disguised as instinct. Here's a story that repeats endlessly in different costumes. A community hears that something familiar is now dangerous. The word chosen is sharp, memorable, emotional. People begin to avoid it, then to condemn it, then to fear those associated with it. The original data was modest. The reaction was not. Language did the rest. The hidden insight is this. These three forms rarely operate alone. Creation introduces the idea. Transformation embeds it emotionally. Control activates behavior. Together they form a loop, a spell that reinforces itself. Once established, it no longer needs a speaker. People repeat it to each other. The magic becomes self-sustaining. Now let me turn to you. As you read this, notice what is happening. Images form. Tension rises and falls. Certain phrases linger longer than others. This is not accidental. It is demonstration. You are feeling the pull because you are human. Awareness does not stop the process, but it changes your relationship to it. The mini-climax arrives quietly, as it always does. It is the moment you realize that influence is not rare or exotic. It is constant. It flows through conversations, screens, institutions, and relationships. The difference between manipulation and mastery is intention and consciousness. One enslaves, the other illuminates. There is a dangerous comfort in believing that control only exists in villains and tyrants. The truth is more unsettling. Control thrives in everyday language, in habits of speech, in well-meaning warnings, in phrases passed down unquestioned. To deny this is to remain vulnerable to it. Yet there is another path. When you learn to see creation as construction, transformation as encoding, and control as bypass, you gain a pause, a sliver of freedom. You can ask, what is being planted? How is it being colored? What response is being pulled from me? That pause is where ethics lives. In the end, communication is not good or evil. It is powerful. And power demands responsibility. The magician who understands the spell must choose how to use it, to heal or to harm, to awaken or to dominate. Words will continue to move through the world like unseen currents. They will create, transform, and control. The only question is whether you drift with them unconsciously or learn to swim with your eyes open. Chapter 3. The Magic of Creation. The story began as a whisper. It always does. A few words exchanged in low voices late at night when certainty is weakest. No one remembered who said it first, only that it felt right, as if it had always been there waiting to be spoken. By the time it reached daylight, it was no longer a rumor. It was what everyone knew. And once something becomes known, it stops asking for permission to exist. That is the magic of creation. Creation in communication is not about inventing something from nothing. It is about assembling meaning inside another mind, brick by brick, word by word. It is the quiet construction of shared understanding, a mental structure two people can now stand inside together. When I speak and you understand, something new exists between us. Not truth, not fact, not fact. Reality is agreed upon. This is where most people misunderstand communication. They imagine it as transmission, like sending a package. But language does not travel intact. It is rebuilt upon arrival. The listener does not receive your idea. They reconstruct it using their memories, fears, beliefs, and desires. Meaning is not delivered, it is co-created. And in that space of construction, influence lives. Narratives are the scaffolding of this process. Humans do not think in isolated facts. We think in stories. Stories provide cause and effect, heroes and threats, beginnings and inevitable ends. Once a narrative frame is accepted, everything inside it feels coherent, even when it is false. Especially when it is false. A well-shaped story does not need proof. It needs resonance. This is why the same event can birth entirely different realities depending on how it is told. A protest becomes a movement or a riot. A decision becomes caution or cowardice. The event remains unchanged. The narrative decides how it will live in the mind. And once repeated, the narrative hardens. Repetition is the mortar that seals the structure. Psychologically, repetition works because familiarity masquerades as truth. The brain is lazy in a very specific way. It prefers what it has seen before. Repeated statements are processed more fluently, and fluency feels like accuracy. This is known clinically as the illusory truth effect. But you have felt it without knowing the name. The sentence you once doubted becomes acceptable simply because it no longer feels foreign. Think of a child growing up in a house where a single phrase circulates endlessly. People like us don't succeed. At first it stings, later it settles. Eventually it defines. The child does not need to be convinced. The world simply aligns around that sentence. Opportunities are avoided. Risks feel irresponsible. Identity crystallizes around a story that was never questioned because it was never silent. On a larger scale, societies are built the same way. Nations, religions, markets, all sustained by shared narratives repeated until they feel inevitable. Money itself is a story we all agree to believe. Value exists because we say it does. Borders matter because we repeat that they do. Creation does not announce itself as power. It arrives disguised as common sense. Here is the unsettling part. Once a narrative takes hold, opposing information does not destroy it. Often, it strengthens it. Contradictions are reframed as attacks. Doubt becomes danger. This is how belief systems defend themselves. The created reality develops an immune system. At this point, truth becomes irrelevant. Loyalty to the story matters more. Consider the workplace slogan painted on a wall. We're a family here. It sounds warm, protective. But watch how it operates. Boundaries blur. Overwork becomes sacrifice. Questioning becomes betrayal. A single repeated phrase reshapes expectations, behavior, even guilt. Creation complete. Now pause again, reader. Notice how many of your own beliefs arrive this way. Not through careful examination, but through repetition. Things you just know. Opinions that feel obvious. Identities that feel natural. Ask yourself where they began. You may find no origin story at all. That is the mark of successful creation. The spell erases its own footprint. The mini-climax of creation is subtle but profound. It is the moment when shared understanding becomes self-enforcing, when people begin to police themselves, when silence feels safer than dissent, when repeating the narrative feels like belonging. At that moment, the creator can step away. The structure stands on its own. This is why creation is the most seductive form of magic. It does not threaten. It invites participation. It offers certainty in a chaotic world. To question it feels lonely. To accept it feels warm. But warmth can be a trap. A comfortable story can cage a mind more effectively than fear, until fear is needed to defend it. And yet, there is another side to this magic. Creation is not inherently dark. It is how understanding, empathy, and cooperation are born. The danger lies not in creating meaning, but in creating it unconsciously, or allowing others to do so without scrutiny. Ethical communication requires humility, the awareness that every word builds something, whether we intend it or not. So here is your quiet responsibility. Listen for repetition. Watch for stories that explain everything. Be wary of narratives that discourage questions or mock doubt. When something feels obvious, lean closer. Obviousness is often the final stage of persuasion. Words are architects. They design inner world. They raise invisible cities where beliefs live, and identities work and fears patrol the gates. You walk through these cities every day, rarely asking who drew the plans. In the end, creation through communication is inevitable. Meaning will be built. Stories will be told. Truth will compete with familiarity. The question is not whether you will live inside a narrative, but whether you will know its shape, its walls, and its exits. Because the most powerful magic does not force belief. It makes belief feel like home. Chapter 4. The Magic of Transformation. The first sound was barely audible, a breath shaped into intention. In the darkness, someone spoke a name, and a body flinched miles away. No touch, no threat, just a vibration in the air that crossed distance, entered flesh, and rearranged something intimate. Later, the listener would say, "It felt real." They would be right. It was. Transformation is the most underestimated magic of all. Creation plants the idea. Control moves the body. But transformation is the bridge between them. The hidden journey that turns a private thought into shared belief. It is where electricity becomes meaning, where air becomes conviction, where a whisper acquires weight. This is not poetry. This is biology. At the core of communication lies a violent elegance. A thought sparks in the brain, an electrical impulse firing across neurons like lightning across a dark sky. That impulse recruits muscles you never consciously command. The tongue tightens, the lips part, the diaphragm pushes air upward. Vocal cords vibrate, sound is born. What began as a private flicker becomes a physical force. The air carries it, molecules collide, waves ripple outward. The sound reaches another body and is captured by the delicate architecture of the ear. Tiny bones strike in sequence, fluid moves, hair cells bend. Another electrical impulse ignites, this time in a different skull. In less than a second, one nervous system has invaded another. Thought has crossed the border. This journey matters because it gives words texture. They are not abstract. They arrive as sensations, tone, rhythm, volume, pause. The brain does not receive language neutrally. It receives it emotionally. Before meaning is decoded, the nervous system asks a simpler question. Is this safe? Is this urgent? Is this a threat? Only after that decision does interpretation follow. This is why the same sentence can soothe or terrify. Why a calm voice can anesthetize doubt. Why shouting can feel like violence even without insult. Transformation embeds language in the body. It recruits heartbeat, breath, posture. Words feel real because the body treats them as events, not symbols. Neuroscience confirms what ancient storytellers always knew. Emotion binds belief. When words carry feeling, especially fear, they are tagged as important. The brain releases chemicals that sharpen attention and deepen memory. Logic is slower, emotion is immediate. By the time reason arrives, the message has already settled. Imagine a child hearing footsteps in the hallway at night. A voice calls their name, soft, slow, safety. The same name shouted sharply later can freeze the blood. The word does not change, the transformation does. Meaning is not in the dictionary, it is in the delivery. Real life is filled with these moments. A courtroom where a single phrase turns a crowd. A hospital room where a diagnosis, phrased one way, collapses hope, and phrased another, ignites it. A leader's speech that makes fear feel like duty. In each case, transformation does the work. Facts remain inert until language animates them. Here is a hidden truth. Belief is not chosen. It is felt first. People do not believe because something is true. They believe because it feels coherent, familiar, emotionally aligned. Transformation creates that alignment. It makes ideas sink into muscle memory. This is why propaganda focuses less on accuracy and more on rhythm. Why chants work. Why slogans outlive arguments. Consider the repeated phrase delivered during crisis. This is for your safety. It calms resistance. It reframes discomfort as protection. Over time, the body relaxes when it hears it. The phrase becomes a sedative, transformation complete. The words no longer need explanation. They carry their own authority. Now let me draw your attention inward. As you read these lines, your eyes move. Your breath shifts. Certain sentences slow you down. Others pull you forward. This is not accidental. It is demonstration. Transformation is happening now. The question is not whether you are affected, but whether you notice the effect. The mini-climax of transformation is the moment when belief becomes embodied. When a phrase tightens the chest. When a name raises the pulse. When an idea feels heavy or light before it feels true or false. That is the crossing point. The instant language becomes reality inside you. This is why transformation is dangerous in careless hands. Because it bypasses debate. It enters through sensation. It can make cruelty feel necessary, obedience feel moral, fear feel wise. It can make people defend ideas that harm them because the ideas feel right in the body. But here is the surprising counterspell. Attention. When you slow down and notice how words land, where they land, you loosen their grip. When you ask, what is this making me feel? Why? You interrupt the transformation. The body still reacts, but the mind regains a step. That step is freedom. Ethical communication respects this power. It acknowledges the transformation without exploiting it. It chooses clarity over shock, context over urgency, care over coercion. Unethical communication does the opposite. It accelerates. It intensifies. It floods the senses so reflection drowns. So listen differently. Feel differently. When a message rushes you, pauses matter. When a voice demands immediacy, breathe. When fear arrives wrapped in authority, ask what part of you it is trying to command. Transformation thrives on speed. Awareness slows it down. In the end, words feel real because they become real, in flesh, in chemistry, in habit. They change how you sit, how you decide, how you remember. They are not ghosts, they are forces. And yet, knowing this does not make you powerless. It makes you responsible for what you absorb, for what you repeat, for what you release into the world through your own voice. Language will always transform. It will cross bodies and leave marks. The question is whether those marks awaken or anesthetize, heal or harden. Because every time you speak, you are not just sharing a thought. You are shaping a nervous system. And that perhaps is the darkest magic of all. Chapter 5. When the senses collide. The hallway lights flickered as the announcement echoed through the station. Not loud, sharp. A clipped tone that cut the air like glass. People didn't stop because they understood the words. They stopped because the sound felt dangerous. Muscles tightened. Steps slowed. Eyes searched for exits. Later, when asked what was said, no one could agree, but everyone remembered the feeling. That is what happens when the senses collide. We like to believe that language enters the mind cleanly, decoded by reason, assessed by logic. It doesn't. Language arrives wearing the skin of sensation. It borrows from sound, shape, rhythm, and memory. Before meaning settles, the body has already voted, sharp or soft, safe or threatening, familiar or foreign. Decision begins there. At the core of this collision is a simple truth. The brain does not keep the senses separate. What you hear changes what you see. What you read changes what you feel. What a word sounds like alters what it means. This blending, often called synesthetic perception, is not a rare condition. It is the default state of human cognition. Say the word knife. Notice how the consonants slice. Say bubble. Feel how the mouth rounds, how the sound floats. These are not coincidences. The brain maps sound to shape, texture, and motion automatically. High-pitched sounds feel sharp and fast. Low tones feel heavy and slow. Language rides these associations like a current. This matters because decisions are rarely made on facts alone. They are made on felt impressions. A policy described as streamlined feels smooth. One described as aggressive feels forceful. The information may be identical. The sensory coding is not. Once coded, the idea slides into judgment without resistance. Psychologically, this happens because the brain evolved for speed, not accuracy. Long before language, survival depended on quick sensory integration. A hiss meant danger. A low rumble meant distance. The modern brain still treats sound as signal. When language mimics threat or comfort, it activates ancient pathways. Meaning follows sensation, not the other way around. This is why certain names stick. Why brands obsess over phonetics. Why slogans are tested aloud. A word that feels right is trusted more. A word that feels wrong is rejected even if it is true. This is not stupidity. It is biology. Consider a courtroom where two lawyers present the same evidence. One speaks slowly, grounding each word. The other rushes, spikes the pitch, sharpens the rhythm. Jurors swear they are impartial, yet heart rates differ. Tension shifts. The verdict tilts. The senses were persuaded before the mind knew it was listening. Or think of a warning sign. Red letters, angled font, short words, danger. The design bypasses literacy entirely. Even a child understands. That is sensory hijacking. Language fused with color, shape, and sound to trigger response. Now imagine the same technique embedded in everyday speech, invisible and constant. Here is the hidden insight. Language does not need to be understood to be effective. It only needs to be felt. This is why chants work in crowds, why slogans survive scrutiny, why certain phrases linger long after their logic collapses. The sensory imprint outlives the argument. Fear thrives here. Fear sharpens perception. It narrows focus. When fear is paired with sensory cues, urgent tone, abrupt phrasing, harsh sounds, it becomes sticky. The brain flags it as important and stores it deep. Later, the mere echo of that sound can revive the feeling. No explanation required. This is how language hijacks associations. Over time, neutral words become loaded. A name becomes a threat. A place becomes unsafe. A concept becomes taboo. The original stimulus fades. The sensory residue remains. People react to the echo, not the event. Now, reader, pause with me. Read the next sentence slowly. You should be worried. Feel how it lands. Notice the subtle tightening. Now read. There's time to think. Different sensation, different posture. Same mind, different outcome. This is not manipulation yet. It is demonstration. The mini-climax of this chapter lives in that realization. Your decisions are shaped before you decide. By the time you weigh options, your senses have already biased the scale. Influence does not argue, it primes. It sets the stage so the choice feels obvious. This is why ethical lines matter. When communicators exploit sensory collisions intentionally, stacking sound, rhythm, and imagery to provoke fear, they bypass consent. They move bodies while pretending to speak to minds. The result is compliance dressed up as agreement. But awareness changes the equation. When you notice how words feel, sharp, smooth, heavy, rushed, you regain leverage. You can ask, why does this sound urgent? What is this tone trying to awaken in me? That question alone weakens the hijack. Slow the message down. Strip it of urgency. Translate sensation back into substance. Shonruk. What remains? Often very little. That is the test. Ethical communication respects sensory power without abusing it. It aligns tone with truth. It avoids unnecessary spikes. It invites reflection instead of panic. Unethical communication does the opposite. It weaponizes sensation to move faster than thought. The world you move through is saturated with these collisions. voices engineered to sound trustworthy, alerts designed to alarm, words chosen for their bite rather than their accuracy. You cannot escape them, but you can listen differently. In the end, the senses are not enemies. They are ancient allies. But when language turns them against you, they become open doors. To guard those doors, you must feel and think. Notice the sound beneath the sense, the texture beneath the truth. Because when the senses collide, reality bends first, and only later does the mind try to explain why. Chapter 6. Predictable Minds. The man in the crowd did not know why he stepped back. The sound came first, a low, rising hum from unseen speakers, not loud, just enough to vibrate the chest. Then the lights dimmed by a fraction. Someone whispered a word he couldn't quite hear. His pulse jumped anyway. Later, he would insist he acted on instinct, on choice. But in that moment, his body moved before his mind arrived. That is where predictability lives. We tell ourselves a comforting story, that we are unique, complex, immune to patterns. That free will stands guard over every decision. But beneath that story is a quieter truth. Humans respond the same way to the same signals again and again. Not because we are weak, because we are built that way. Influence does not need to conquer the mind. It only needs to press the right buttons, and those buttons are ancient. At its simplest, the idea is unsettling. If you know the stimulus, you can predict the response. Raise urgency, people rush. Introduce scarcity, people cling. Add authority, people comply. Pair fear with repetition, belief hardens. This is not theory. It is observed behavior, measured and replicated across cultures, ages, and intelligence levels. Predictability is not the enemy of freedom, it is the shadow it casts. Psychologically, the brain survives by reducing uncertainty. Every moment is too complex to analyze fully, so the mind relies on shortcuts. Patterns learned through evolution and experience. These shortcuts once kept us alive. A sudden noise meant predator. A confident leader meant safety. A fearful group meant danger nearby. The modern world exploits these ancient reflexes with surgical precision. The illusion of free choice begins here. You feel like you decided, but the conditions were arranged so only one option felt right. The menu was written before you arrived. Consider how often urgency dictates action. Limited time. Last chance. Act now. The rational mind knows these phrases are manipulative, yet the body responds anyway. Heart rate increases. Focus narrows. The future shrinks to a single point. Under urgency, people choose speed over accuracy every time. This is not a flaw. It is a feature. In emergencies, hesitation kills. Influence borrows that wiring and triggers it on demand. Then there is social proof, the quiet pressure of others. A crowd looking one way pulls your gaze without asking. Applause invites hands to move. Silence discourages dissent. You may believe you are evaluating independently, but your nervous system is scanning faces, tones, and reactions, adjusting you into alignment. To be out of sync feels dangerous. Long ago it was. These mechanisms operate without awareness. That is the most disturbing part. You cannot defend against what you do not notice. Influence works best when it feels like your own thought, when resistance never forms because nothing appears to attack. History is full of examples, but the everyday ones are more revealing. A manager frames a risky plan as what everyone agrees on. A headline uses fear-laced language to frame a neutral event. A voice lowers, slows, and suddenly sounds trustworthy. No commands are issued, no force is applied, and yet behavior shifts. Here is a hidden truth rarely spoken aloud. Most persuasion succeeds not by changing minds, but by choosing the moment when minds are most open. Fatigue, stress, uncertainty, hope, fear. These states soften boundaries. Influence waits patiently for them. You have felt this yourself. Late at night, scrolling, when defenses are low. In a crisis, when answers matter more than accuracy. In a room where everyone seems certain, and doubt feels like betrayal. Choice still exists, but it is tilted. Now let me speak to you directly. You are not as unpredictable as you think. Neither am I. Neither is anyone reading this. That realization can feel insulting, even frightening. But it is also liberating, because once you see the pattern, you can step outside it. The mini-climax of this chapter is not dramatic. It is quiet. It happens when you realize that influence does not chase you, it waits for you to become ready. Ready through emotion, through repetition, through fatigue, through fear. When the moment aligns, the message lands effortlessly. This is why slogans repeat. Why narratives cycle? Why the same phrases appear everywhere at once? Repetition does not convince through logic. It convinces through familiarity. The brain mistakes the familiar for the true. What is often heard feels safe. What feels safe feels right. Free choice is not eliminated here. It is masked. You choose from options shaped by forces you did not select. Like walking through a corridor with invisible walls, you move freely, unaware of how narrow the path really is. Ethical communication acknowledges this responsibility. It refuses to exploit predictability for domination. It uses clarity instead of confusion, steadiness instead of panic. Unethical communication does the opposite. It studies the patterns not to protect, but to control. And here is the most uncomfortable insight of all. The more intelligent you are, the better you are at rationalizing influence after it works. You explain the choice. You build reasons. You defend it passionately, not realizing the decision was made long before the explanation was written. Awareness is the counterspell. When you feel urgency, pause. When you sense fear rising without clear cause, question the source. When everyone agrees too quickly, look for what is missing. Slow down the moment. Predictability relies on speed. Reflection breaks the rhythm. In the end, the human mind is not a fortress. It is a landscape shaped by weather, worn by paths, responsive to light and shadow. Influence studies the terrain. Ethics decides how it is used. You cannot become unpredictable. That is a myth, but you can become conscious. And consciousness, once awakened, is the one pattern influence cannot fully control. Chapter 7. The Magic of Control. The voice was calm. Too calm. It flowed steadily through the room, measured and warm, like a hand resting gently on the back of your neck. No commands were given, no threats made, yet people leaned forward without realizing it. Breathing slowed, blinks synchronized, time stretched. Later, many would say they felt drawn in, as if something had guided them. They would struggle to explain why they agreed, why they stayed, why they followed. Control rarely announces itself. It whispers. At its core, the magic of control is not loud domination but soft surrender. It works not by overpowering the mind, but by slipping beneath it, past conscious thought into automatic reaction. This is where influence becomes something darker, something heavier, something that does not ask. Everyday communication is already hypnotic. Rhythm, repetition, tone, pacing. These are not decorative elements. They are tools that shape attention. A slow voice calms. A confident cadence reassures. A pause invites anticipation. The mind does not resist these patterns because it evolved to follow them. Long before language carried meaning, sound carried safety or threat. Hypnosis, in its popular image, feels exotic, but its real form is mundane. It appears when attention narrows, when critical thought quiets, when suggestion feels like self-discovery. In conversation, in media, in leadership, these conditions appear constantly. You do not need a trance, only focus and emotion aligned. The mind operates on two levels. One is deliberate, analytical, slow. The other is automatic, fast, emotional. Control prefers the second. Automatic reactions save energy. They allow us to move through the world without stopping at every step. But when communication bypasses conscious thought, it also bypasses consent. Fear is the fastest path. When fear enters, the mind simplifies. Options collapse. Complexity feels dangerous. The body prepares for action, not reflection. In this state, the voice that offers certainty gains authority instantly. The message does not need to be accurate. It needs to feel protective. Consider a familiar scenario. A crisis unfolds. Information floods in. Conflicting explanations clash. Anxiety rises. Then one narrative cuts through the noise, clean and decisive. It names a cause. It names an enemy. It names a solution. Relief washes over those who accept it, not because it is true, but because it ends uncertainty. Control is often welcomed as comfort. This is where influence crosses into domination. Domination occurs when communication removes the listener's ability to question, not by force, but by shaping the emotional environment so questioning feels wrong, dangerous, disloyal, exhausting. The message becomes the mental default. Alternatives feel distant, abstract, unreal. Psychologically, this happens through conditioning. Certain words become charged. Certain ideas trigger emotion before thought. Over time, the reaction becomes automatic. A phrase sparks anger. A label sparks fear. A symbol sparks trust. The mind no longer evaluates, it responds. Real life offers quiet examples. A workplace where dissent is framed as negativity. A relationship where concern is labeled betrayal. A culture where repeating the right phrases signals belonging. No chains are visible, yet behavior is constrained. Here is a hidden insight few want to face. Control often feels like clarity. It feels like finally understanding, like seeing through the fog. This is why it is dangerous. The more certain you feel, the less likely you are to examine how that certainty was produced. Now, let me turn the mirror toward you. You have experienced this. Moments when you agreed too quickly. When a voice felt trustworthy without evidence. When you reacted emotionally before knowing why. This does not make you foolish. It makes you human. The systems that allow control to work are the same ones that allow learning, bonding, and survival. The danger is not influence itself. The danger is unconscious influence. The mini climax of this chapter arrives when you realize that control does not require evil intent. Many who wield it believe they are helping, protecting, guiding. They mistake obedience for harmony, silence for peace, compliance for agreement. And because the methods feel subtle, they feel justified. Ethical communication draws a line here. It respects the listener's autonomy. It invites reflection instead of urgency. It allows space for disagreement. Unethical communication closes that space. It rushes. It overwhelms. It frames resistance as a flaw. The most powerful controllers do not shout. They align. They mirror. They pace your emotions until you feel understood. Then they lead. By the time direction appears, it feels like your own idea. Awareness disrupts this process. When you notice rhythm pulling you in, break it. When emotion surges before understanding, pause. When certainty feels unusually comforting, ask what uncertainty it replaces. Control depends on momentum. Conscious thought is friction. Philosophically, this raises an unsettling question. If control can feel like comfort, and freedom can feel like confusion, which will people choose? The answer shapes societies. Communication will always carry power. Words will always move minds. The question is not whether magic exists, but who holds it and how responsibly it is used. To speak is to influence. To listen is to risk being shaped. The final truth is simple and heavy. Control thrives in darkness. Awareness is light. And once you see the strings, they never feel quite the same in your hands. Chapter 8. Affect the emotion before thought. The scream was sudden, sharp, and uninvited. It sliced through the quiet room like a knife through silk. Hearts jumped. Breath caught. Every eye darted toward the source before any brain had time to process the sound. That was affect in its purest form. The body reacting before thought, primal, immediate, unstoppable. You do not ask permission to feel. You simply feel. Affect is the dark undercurrent beneath all communication, the pulse that beats before reason. It is emotion in its raw, pre-conscious state. The body reacts, muscles tense, adrenaline floods, senses sharpen, all before words form in the mind. And because affect comes first, it wields more power than logic ever could. It is the spell that precedes understanding, the whisper that bends perception, the force that tilts decisions without asking. Consider this. Your mind may analyze a warning, evaluate probabilities, weigh evidence. But by the time it acts, your body has already reacted. Fear, joy, disgust, surprise. They erupt first as instinctive, unavoidable responses. They shape how you interpret everything that follows. If a sound makes your chest tighten, your brain will assign meaning to it that matches the emotion. If a phrase causes tension, your mind will search for danger. Affect dictates narrative before the storyteller speaks. Psychologists call this affective primacy, but the implications are far more sinister than a clinical term suggests. Influence harnesses this. Advertisers, politicians, media, and manipulators all understand that emotion precedes reason, and that reason will follow the story emotion dictates. By speaking to the body first, they ensure that the mind will justify what the body has already decided. Fear is not just a feeling. It is a guide, a compass, a gatekeeper. An affect is the current that carries it. A real-world example demonstrates the precision of this magic. In the 1980s, the outbreak of mad cow disease terrified the United Kingdom. Scientists struggled to explain a complex chain of events. Misfolded proteins, risk of transmission to humans, probabilistic dangers. The public barely registered the dry terms. Then a journalist renamed it mad cow disease. Suddenly, people reacted. Panic rose. Supermarkets emptied. Protesters marched. Affect had been triggered. The body's response preceded understanding. The term itself, the rhythm and connotation of the words, manipulated perception, translating scientific ambiguity into emotional certainty. Affect created urgency, urgency shaped decisions, and decisions reshaped reality. This is why communication is dangerous. Words alone do not create obedience or belief. They are instruments that channel affect. A well-placed tone, a sudden sound, a choice of metaphor. Each can stir the body before the mind has a chance to veto it. And once affect has moved, logic follows to justify, excuse, or narrate that movement as my choice. Directly to you, the reader. Every time your pulse jumps at a sudden image, every time your stomach tightens at a word, every time you feel inexplicable dread while reading a headline, affect is working on you. You may rationalize it, you may dismiss it, but your body has already decided how to react. This is the subtle, invisible spell of communication, the magic that bends reality by first bending perception. The mini-climax occurs when you realize the breadth of its reach. Affect is everywhere. A social media post, a whispered rumor, a siren in the night. Even laughter can carry affect, synchronizing groups into shared emotion, directing thought collectively without a single conscious agreement. Influence does not need argument. It needs feeling. Hidden truths emerge when you step back. Fear is not merely an emotion. It is a decision-making engine. Affect is not an interruption. It is the original form of knowledge. The body perceives, reacts, and sets the stage for cognition. Every mind, even the sharpest, is first a body, first a feeling, first a machine of affect. Ethical mastery begins with awareness. Noticing affect is not weakness. It is insight. Recognize the tremor in your chest, the tightening of your throat, the rush of your pulse. Question it before logic arrives to justify it. Separate your choices from the automatic reaction. Only then do you regain agency in a world where words are spells and emotion is the conduit of control. Philosophically, this chapter leaves an unsettling truth. The body knows first. The mind only rationalizes later. And the world often acts on the body's response rather than the mind's judgment. Affect is the invisible hand guiding decisions, shaping beliefs and bending reality before reason even opens its eyes. And once you understand it, you can no longer pretend you are untouched. The spell is everywhere, but recognition is your first countermagic. Chapter 9. Fear keeps you alive and obedient. The room went cold before the warning even arrived. A single shadow stretched across the wall, cast by the faint glow of a flickering light. Hearts beat faster, muscles tensed, and 1,000 tiny hairs stood on end. Fear had arrived, not as a thought, but as a wave that rolled through the body, demanding attention, demanding action. It was the oldest spell in the human arsenal, one that has kept us alive for millennia, but fear is a double-edged blade. It protects and it enslaves. Fear is the mind's first messenger. Evolution designed it as an alarm system, finely tuned to detect danger, to trigger fight, flight, or freeze. Long before civilization, long before reason, humans and their ancestors depended on fear to survive the wild. A rustle in the grass could mean a predator. A shadow in the dark could mean death. Our bodies learned to respond faster than the brain could comprehend. Eyes widened. Heart raced. Muscles primed. Fear saved lives. Fear shaped behavior. Yet here's the sinister truth. Fear does not disappear when danger disappears. It lingers, it mutates. It becomes a tool for control. Once fear is triggered, logic retreats. Reason is slow, deliberate, cautious. Fear is instant, primal, commanding. And when fear dominates, the body obeys first and questions later. Advertisers, politicians, media outlets, even social groups know this. They harness it. They feed it. They wrap it in language, in imagery, in tone, until obedience seems natural, inevitable, protective. And by the time the mind catches up, it rationalizes the choices the body has already made. Consider a scene you know too well. A breaking news alert blares on your screen. Terrifying new threat, it screams. Images flash. Chaos, injury, disaster. Your chest tightens, your stomach knots, and you click the link before thinking. You do not question. You act. The headline has already nudged your behavior, aligned your emotions, and primed your decision-making. Fear, invisible and intangible, has claimed authority. Historically, the mechanics of fear in public perception are staggering. In the United Kingdom during the 1980s, a disease quietly spread through cattle, initially described in complex scientific terms no one understood. The public remained indifferent. Then came the rebranding. Mad cow disease. The name itself carried menace, urgency, and horror. People reacted immediately. Panic, protests, supermarket runs. Fear had been shaped linguistically, socially, and culturally. The disease itself had not changed. But public perception, behavior, and decisions had been utterly transformed. Psychologically, fear hijacks attention. It narrows the mind, focusing all resources on the perceived threat. This narrowing is why fear overrides logic. It amplifies risks disproportionately, prioritizing immediate survival cues over measured analysis. A sudden loud sound, a warning signal, a vivid image. It commands attention, disables deliberation, and channels action. In this state, a person is highly suggestible. They may follow guidance blindly, obey authority without questioning, or conform to social pressures instinctively. Fear becomes obedience. Fear becomes control. Directly to you. Recall the last time you felt a visceral jolt, a rush of panic at a news alert, an alarm, or a sudden warning. Did you think critically in that moment? Or did your body move first, your mind only afterward justifying the reaction? This is the spell of fear. It is ancient, universal, and intimate. It is the bridge from instinct to influence. The mini-climax arrives when you grasp the duality. The same mechanism that kept our ancestors alive can now shape societies, markets, and decisions in ways that serve agendas. Fear is protective in one context, manipulative in another. Recognizing the difference is crucial. Fear exploited is obedience, dressed as self-preservation. Fear harnessed consciously is survival in its purest form. Hidden truths reveal themselves when you notice the subtle manipulations around you. How language emphasizes danger. How repetition amplifies dread. How symbols, metaphors, and tone prime reactions without your awareness. Once fear touches the body, it guides thought. Once thought is guided, action follows. And once action follows, reality itself bends subtly, invisibly. Philosophically, this chapter leaves an unsettling reflection. Fear is neither inherently good nor evil. It is ancient, neutral, primal. Its morality lies in the hands of those who wield it, and in the awareness of those who feel it. Mastering the dark magic of communication requires seeing fear as both a tool and a weapon. Understanding when it saves, when it enslaves, and when it quietly shapes your mind without your consent. To live consciously is to recognize the spell before it strikes, and for the first time, reclaim choice. Chapter 10. The moment fear takes over. The lights flickered, plunging the narrow corridor into a stuttering darkness. Shadows leapt across the walls as if alive, echoing the irregular thump of a heartbeat that wasn't yours, or maybe it was. The air thickened, heavy and charged, carrying the faint metallic scent of something unseen. You froze. A shiver crawling up your spine. Your body had already decided. Fight, flight, or freeze. Your mind, still fumbling, trying to catch up. This is the moment fear takes over. Fear is not a polite guest. It barges in, unannounced, bending your perception before your rational mind has a chance to weigh in. At its core, a fear response is a symphony of biological precision. Adrenaline surges, pupils dilate, muscles tense, heart hammers. Sudden, the sensory system sharpens, every nerve ending humming with electricity. Your body becomes a finely tuned instrument, entirely focused on a single question: survive. And while the body moves, the mind rationalizes later, scrambling to explain why you screamed, recoiled, or bolted. The moment fear dominates, context becomes everything. That rustle in the bushes could be a predator, a thief, or a falling branch. Your brain's first interpretation is raw and primal, threat. Only later, when your heartbeat slows, do you assess, reevaluate, and perhaps sigh with relief. Until then, perception is narrowed, attention locked, every detail filtered through the lens of survival. Fear is a spotlight, and everything outside its beam fades into irrelevance. This is the dark power of communication. When words, images, or sounds trigger fear, they hijack attention, guiding thought before understanding even enters the equation. Psychologically, this is why fear is so effective as a tool of influence. Consider the headlines screaming about distant catastrophes, political crises, or viral outbreaks. They are not mere words. They are triggers, calibrated to elicit an effective response that bypasses reasoning. By the time you read statistics or expert opinions, your body has already reacted. Your decisions are no longer purely rational. They are instinctive, affect-driven, and susceptible to manipulation. Fear becomes a puppet master, pulling invisible strings. Real-life examples abound. In the 1980s, when reports of mad cow disease emerged, the public initially paid little attention. The technical terminology, complex, clinical, distant, failed to spark alarm. Then the name was changed, mad cow disease. Instantly, fear activated. Consumers abandoned beef. Panic rippled through media, supermarkets, and households. Behavior had shifted not because risk had changed, but because fear had been reframed. The same biological and cognitive mechanisms that once kept our ancestors alive now bend our modern decisions in ways we barely perceive. But the anatomy of a fear response is more subtle than headlines and diseases. Even mundane interactions exploit it. A sudden tone of voice, a looming shadow, a word chosen for its sharp consonants or harsh rhythm. These are all capable of triggering primal responses. Synesthetic perception, where sound, shape, and meaning intertwine, amplifies the effect. Kichi feels spiky, boba feels round. Linguistic choices stir physical sensations, and the body reacts long before logic can intervene. Influence becomes invisible, intimate, and relentless, directly to you. Every time you recoil from a warning, freeze at a sudden noise, or feel inexplicable dread reading a phrase, your body is under siege, your attention has been seized, your reasoning temporarily sidelined. These are the precise mechanics manipulators exploit. They do not need to shout orders. They only need to trigger effective circuits that dominate cognition. By understanding this, you reclaim agency. Recognize the moment your body reacts, pause before your mind justifies, and observe the context shaping your response. The mini-climax of this revelation lies in its inevitability. Fear is universal, unavoidable, and instantaneous. It will always arrive before thought. It will always bend perception, even in the most vigilant minds. Recognizing it is not surrender, it is power. Awareness is the first shield, the first counterspell against those who wield effect like a weapon. Hidden truths emerge when you examine your own reactions. What feels urgent may be amplified by affect, not by logic. What seems threatening may be manipulated by design. And yet, this is not a call to paranoia. It is a call to conscious engagement. To live wisely, you must witness the spell as it lands, understand its mechanics, and intervene with reason where you can. Philosophically, the lesson is stark. Fear is an engine that drives attention, narrows perception, and dictates behavior. Its power is ancient, physiological, and absolute. Words, sounds, and images can unlock it at will. But knowledge tempers fear. Recognition tempers instinct. Understanding transforms what once enslaved you into a tool of vigilance. The moment fear takes over is inevitable, but the moment you see it, you begin to reclaim mastery over yourself. Fear, after all, is both the key and the lock. And the first step in unlocking its control is seeing it clearly before it bends reality around you. Chapter 11. What Risk Really Is. Rain streaked the windows like a curtain of silver knives, each drop hammering a rhythm against the glass that matched the uneasy pulse in your chest. The streetlights flickered, shadows stretching and retreating, as if the darkness itself was alive, watching. You can feel it, that edge of dread, that whisper of danger that seems to come from nowhere. It's a sensation that everyone experiences, yet no one fully understands. Welcome to the world of risk, messy, elusive, and terrifyingly subjective. At its essence, risk is deceptively simple. Funnens. Experts define it mathematically as the product of magnitude and probability. Magnitude, the severity of harm. Probability, the likelihood it will happen. On paper, it's neat and clean, a formula that can categorize dangers from a paper cut to a plane crash. But life rarely adheres to formulas. People live in perception, not probability. Your brain does not calculate numbers while it responds to a rattling in the night. It reacts. Fear, attention, emotion. These are your true metric. And here lies the first dark secret of communication. When perception diverges from reality, influence fills the gap. Consider this. Plane crashes are catastrophic but rare. Most people fear flying more than driving, even though driving kills far more. Allergies, mundane hazards, poor diet. These are frequent and potentially deadly, yet they fail to trigger panic. Why? Because affect and attention are selective. Humans are wired to respond to sudden, sharp, visible threats, not slow-moving, statistical dangers. Our intuition is not rational. It's ancient, designed for survival in a jungle. Not a modern world of probabilities and epidemiology. Manipulators exploit this gap, feeding fears that feel immediate while ignoring risks that are slow, hidden, or abstract. Psychologically, the conflict between objective risk and perceived risk creates fertile ground for influence. When you read sensational headlines about exotic threats, Ebola outbreaks, shark attacks, cyber terrorism, your mind jumps to worst-case scenarios. Your body reacts before your reasoning catches up. The mathematics, the data, the careful statistical nuance, these are drowned out by effective power. Risk communication is not merely about facts. It is about framing, timing, and emotional resonance. Words can amplify, suppress, or distort the perception of danger, bending behavior with near-magical precision. History offers chilling illustrations. In the late 20th century, public health authorities tried to communicate the dangers of radon, a colorless, odorless gas that quietly infiltrates homes and causes lung cancer. The public largely ignored it. Its slow, invisible nature failed to spark immediate fear. Contrast that with the Y2K hysteria. Improbable, abstract, but dressed in ominous tones, it sent people stocking supplies, building bunkers, preparing for apocalypse. Risk, it seems, is not objective. It is a story we feel in our bodies before we can analyze it with our minds. Directly to you, the reader. Recognize this. Every time you recoil from an alarming headline, hesitate before a startling statistic, or feel urgency in a crisis that is unlikely to touch you, your perception of risk has been hijacked. Your affective systems, the biological networks of fear, surprise, and attention, are doing the heavy lifting, and someone may be guiding them. Understanding the mechanics of risk perception is the first step in reclaiming autonomy. You must learn to distinguish the magnitude of actual threat from the probability of occurrence. And most importantly, separate both from the emotional narrative designed to move you. The mini-climax is terrifying in its simplicity. Humans are predictable. We react to the dramatic, the immediate, the visually and emotionally vivid. We ignore slow killers, abstract dangers, and statistical inevitabilities. And because we respond predictably, influence, subtle, potent, and often unseen, flows through communication like an invisible current, steering decisions, shaping behaviors and molding fears without ever needing consent. Hidden truths emerge in the gaps between data and perception. Most people never calculate risk consciously. They rely on instinct, headlines, and stories. And manipulators know it. Politicians, marketers, media outlets, and even peers can exploit this, crafting narratives that exaggerate or minimize danger to control attention and drive action. Recognizing these invisible forces allows you to step back, to measure probability and magnitude rationally, and to resist being swept into panic or complacency. Philosophically, risk is both real and illusion. It exists in numbers, in probabilities, and in potential harm. But it lives in perception, in effect, and in the stories we tell ourselves. To navigate the modern world safely, to communicate ethically, and to defend against manipulation, you must see all three layers. Understand the mathematics, acknowledge your body's instinctive reactions, and untangle the narratives that seek to bind your mind. Only then can you wield the dark magic of communication responsibly, or shield yourself from those who already do. Risk is not merely about danger. It is about attention, emotion, and control. And like all magic, understanding its mechanics is the first step toward mastery. Chapter 12. The Emotional Distortion of Risk. The night had an unnatural stillness, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every creak of a house feel like a predator prowling just outside your vision. You sit in your room, scrolling endlessly through alerts, headlines, flashing red banners, screaming danger, scandal, catastrophe. Each ping feels like a threat, even if you cannot define it. You feel your pulse quicken, your stomach knot, a shiver crawling up your spine. And yet, most of the dangers you see, while terrifying in their presentation, are far less likely to touch your life than the mundane hazards you barely notice. This is the dark, invisible alchemy of risk, the emotional distortion that inflates the rare and deflates the common. Risk is not measured only in probability and magnitude. It is measured in the currency of attention, fear, and outrage. Rare events, violent stories, and grotesque images seize your mind and lock your body into alert. Your senses, ancient and untrustworthy, tell you, this is urgent. This is dangerous. Meanwhile, everyday risks, the ones that quietly accumulate in habits, environmental exposures, and unseen threats, slide past unnoticed. Your perception becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting amplified fears while concealing real dangers in shadow. Psychologically, this happens because the brain does not process abstract probabilities well. Instead, it prioritizes vivid, immediate, and emotionally charged stimuli. Media, social networks, and sensational narratives exploit this bias mercilessly. Consider the headlines: shark attacks, plane crashes, mass shootings. Each one triggers a primal alarm, spikes adrenaline, and grabs your attention. Meanwhile, heart disease, obesity, or chronic pollution, statistically far deadlier, fail to make your skin crawl, fail to disrupt your scrolling, fail to elicit the same visceral response. Attention is the modern battleground, and outrage is the weapon. Think back to the I2K scare, or the panic over mad cow disease. Millions reacted with urgency, stocking supplies, canceling travel, changing behaviors overnight. The objective risks were often small, improbable, or misrepresented, but emotionally they felt enormous. This is the hidden magic of influence. Fear reshapes priorities before logic can intervene. Your mind may try to reason, to compare statistics, but the body has already decided to react, to hedge against an imagined catastrophe. Fear overrides calculation. Fear hijacks your focus. And in that vacuum, manipulators thrive. You, the reader, are not immune. Every time you feel a tightening in your chest at the sight of a flashing headline, you are being drawn into this alchemy. Your priorities shift unconsciously. Time and attention, the most precious resources you have, are pulled toward threats that feel urgent, spectacular, or dramatic. Your emotional mind sets the agenda long before your rational mind has a chance to intervene. This is not conspiracy. It is evolution, exploited by modern storytellers and communicators. The mini-climax emerges when you realize how deliberate this distortion can be. News cycles, social media algorithms, and viral content are optimized to exploit your effective responses. One well-crafted story, one emotionally charged image, one ambiguous statistic can trigger the same flight or fight state your ancestors felt when stalked by predators. Your body reacts as if the threat is immediate. Your mind struggles to catch up. Manipulators, politicians, marketers, sensational journalists have learned to harness this. They amplify the improbable and obscure the likely, shaping behavior and perception without the slightest resistance from you. Yet there is hope hidden in awareness. When you understand that your fears are being curated, that your attention is being deliberately guided, you gain a measure of freedom. You can pause. You can question. You can measure the probability against the emotional weight. You can see the pattern behind the panic and realize that the stories are designed not to inform, but to move, to capture, to control. In the quiet recognition of this, you reclaim power over your own priorities. Philosophically, the emotional distortion of risk reveals a simple, uncomfortable truth. Reality is not what happens. It is what we feel happens. Our perception of danger, urgency, and importance is shaped as much by narrative, emotion, and effect as by facts. Words, images, and stories are the sorcery that molds attention and fear, bending human behavior with precision and subtlety. Recognize the spell, name the magician, and you step out of the hall of mirrors. Only then can you begin to see the world as it is, rather than as it has been dramatized for your fear. Fear does not just keep you alive, it keeps you moving, watching, reacting. But in its manipulation lies a quiet magic, one that shapes priorities, decisions, and reality itself. And now that you see it, the question is no longer if you can be influenced, but if you will allow it. Chapter 13. Naming Fear. The room was dark, lit only by the cold glow of a single screen. Numbers, words, images, chaotic, alarming, flashed across it in a rhythm that felt almost predatory. A low hum vibrated in your chest like the distant growl of a storm gathering strength. You could feel it, the unease, the prickling tension crawling up your spine. Something dangerous lurked in the data, but you could not name it. You could sense it, feel its edges pressing against your mind, yet it remained unnamed, elusive, abstract. And then, with a single phrase, a word, the shadow solidified. The intangible became concrete. Fear had a name, and the world changed. Language is not neutral. It does not simply describe reality. It molds it. Words shape perception, ignite imagination, and more dangerously, manipulate emotion. By naming a threat, by giving it form and identity, we give our minds something to latch onto. Suddenly, abstract anxiety is tangible. Invisible danger becomes an immediate presence. The power of a name is ancient, primal, and profoundly psychological. Consider the story of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, the medical term that once described what the world would soon call mad cow disease. Scientists in the 1980s had discovered a terrifying reality. Cows were consuming diseased feed, proteins in their brains folding upon themselves, literally chewing holes through their own flesh. The implications for human health were real but abstract. The name BS was technical, cumbersome, and emotionally inert. People heard it, nodded politely, and moved on. The danger existed, but it had not yet struck terror into minds. Enter language as emotional engineering. In 1990, journalist David Brown renamed the phenomenon mad cow disease. Instantly, the invisible became monstrous. The word mad conjured images of uncontrollable frenzy, unpredictable violence, eyes wild with delirium. Suddenly, the public felt the threat viscerally. Beef sales plummeted, protests erupted, anxiety spread faster than any biological contagion. A single name transformed public behavior overnight, altering choices, beliefs, and priorities. Words had wielded their dark magic. This is the hidden architecture of influence. When fear is named, it is no longer abstract. It is actionable. Your body responds before your mind can fully rationalize the threat. The effective system, that primal engine of emotional judgment, ignites first. Heart rate spikes. Pupils dilate. The mind searches for solutions, precautions, escape routes. Rational thought attempts to follow, but it is always a step behind. Naming fear is the first spell in the magician's arsenal, the prelude to deeper manipulation. And yet, most people remain unaware of this power. You, the reader, have felt it yourself. The rush of anxiety when a new disease appears in the headlines, the sudden apprehension at a familiar warning, the knot in your stomach as a name gives form to an unseen threat. These are the traces of linguistic sorcery. The mind is drawn inexorably toward the named fear, your attention captured, your behavior subtly nudged. You shop differently, vote differently, protect your children differently, all because words have engineered your emotional response. The psychological breakdown is stark. Fear is a powerful motivator precisely because it activates ancient survival mechanisms. When you cannot see the threat, your imagination amplifies it. When you cannot name it, you are suspended in anxiety without a target. Give it a name, and suddenly, the threat exists in a container you can recognize and react to. But this reaction is automatic, preconscious, and manipulable. Language does not merely inform. It programs affective states, primes attention, and directs behavior. Every media headline, every political soundbite, every viral social post is a potential vector for this manipulation. The mini-climax of this chapter emerges when you understand the subtlety of this power. Naming is not a neutral act. It is an emotional lever. It turns abstract danger into immediate threat. It turns passivity into reaction, complacency into panic. Mad cow disease, SARS, Ebola, or even the euphemistically named financial crisis. Each demonstrates that naming shapes perception, urgency, and response. And once the word is spoken, once it is circulated, once it lodges in memory, the spell is cast. You are already under its influence before you realize it. Yet awareness can dismantle this magic. When you recognize the spell, when you see how language molds fear, you regain control. You pause before your mind and body respond. You question the framing, analyze the probability, measure the magnitude, and consider context. You separate signal from noise, risk from manipulation. By naming the magician behind the words, you reclaim your autonomy. Philosophically, this is the most disturbing truth. Reality is filtered through language before it is filtered through reason. A name is never innocent. Words have weight, shape, and power. They do not merely convey, they construct. Fear is not just an internal response. It is a social, linguistic, and emotional artifact. Understanding this is the first step in mastering the dark magic of communication. Only when you see how words summon monsters from the shadows can you choose whether to flee, fight, or stand still, and perhaps, in the quiet knowing, to turn the spell against itself. The next time you hear a name designed to strike terror, pause, look at it, feel it, analyze it. Then ask yourself, who named this fear and to what end? In that question lies the possibility of freedom. Chapter 14. Amplified and Attenuated Threats. The night was restless. Neon signs flickered over empty streets, and the faint hum of electricity was the only constant. Somewhere a siren wailed. A warning or a distraction, you could not tell. Your mind raced, shifting between imagined dangers, each more vivid than the last. You could feel the tension inside, a tight coil of nerves primed to respond. Yet, when the source finally came into view, a minor accident, nothing more, your pulse refused to calm. Something had magnified the danger in your mind before reality had even arrived. This is the architecture of fear in the modern age. Some threats loom larger than they are, while others, despite being catastrophic, remain invisible. Communication, through headlines, social media, conversations, even casual rumors, amplifies some dangers and attenuates others. We live in a world where perception often overrides probability, where our emotional radar is guided not by logic but by the signals our environment floods us with. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Millions of people lost their homes, pensions, and savings. Entire economies trembled. And yet, the headlines rarely captured the slow, grinding devastation of ordinary family. Instead, the fear was amplified around corporate bailouts, bank collapses, and stock market crashes. Emotional attention was drawn to symbolic figures, to dramatic moments, while the systemic risks, long-term unemployment, mental health crises, generational poverty, were muted. The public panicked in some areas and remained oblivious in others. Their effective responses misaligned with the objective threat. This misalignment is no accident. Those who craft narratives, from journalists to policymakers to corporate communicators, know which levers of attention will move the masses. Fear is currency. Amplified threats demand immediate action. Attenuated threats are ignored until they erupt into crisis. The magician of communication does not need to invent danger, merely to adjust the volume, to sharpen some signals, to mute others. And like any skilled spellcaster, the goal is often not truth, but influence. Psychologically, this manipulation exploits our affective wiring. The human mind is exquisitely sensitive to novelty, salience, and vividness. Rare dramatic events are easier to picture, easier to remember, and easier to transmit. They capture attention because our survival instincts prioritize sudden, unusual, or visually striking stimuli. Ordinary, statistically significant risks, obesity, climate change, chronic disease, fail to trigger this urgency. Our focus is hijacked, skewed toward the spectacular, the immediate, the sensational. Words, images, and repeated narratives amplify this imbalance, turning the extraordinary into the omnipresent and the mundane into the invisible. Real-life examples abound. Airline accidents dominate news cycles. Meanwhile, car accidents, thousands each year, equally deadly, go unnoticed in daily conversation. Media coverage, social commentary, and even casual gossip work as emotional amplifiers, signaling to our minds which threats demand attention and which do not. The result is a collective distortion of reality, a society navigating on skewed risk perception, reacting emotionally to a curated set of dangers. And who benefits? Those who understand the mechanisms of amplification can influence behavior, markets, politics, public health, consumer choices. With remarkable efficiency, fear becomes a tool, guiding populations without explicit coercion. Advertising, political messaging, and social campaigns are often built on this principle. Highlight certain dangers, downplay others, and watches attention, and consequently action shifts predictably, directly to you, the reader. Notice how your mind reacts, which dangers feel urgent, and which slip past your awareness. Observe the rhythm of headlines, the framing of stories, the words that linger in memory long after the details fade. The manipulation is subtle but persistent, threading through everyday life, shaping perception without your explicit consent. Recognizing it is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy. The mini-climax of understanding comes when you realize the scale of the spell. Misaligned fear is not a mistake. It is a deliberate orchestration of attention. Entire social movements, consumer behaviors, and political outcomes can be predicted or engineered once one understands which threat society amplifies and which it ignores. The power is intoxicating, invisible, and rarely challenged. Yet, philosophical reflection tempers this revelation. Misaligned fear is both a vulnerability and a lesson. It teaches us that perception is malleable, that the mind's priorities are shaped as much by words and images as by reality itself. Awareness is the antidote. Knowing the levers of amplification and attenuation allows you to navigate the world with both caution and clarity. You cannot eliminate fear, but you can choose which threats deserve attention and which are illusions magnified in the theater of the mind. The next time a headline seizes your attention, or a viral story stirs your anxiety, pause, ask, why does this matter to me right now? Who benefits from my alarm? And which dangers, quiet but real, remain invisible to the chorus of amplified voices? In those questions lies the reclamation of thought, the subtle mastery over the dark magic that governs attention. Chapter 15. Headlines designed to control. The fluorescent glow of a late-night newsstand flickered over the deserted street. Posters screamed in bold fonts, "This could kill you." Experts warn of impending doom, what they aren't telling you. You felt it immediately, the tightening in your chest, the prickling at the base of your skull, the unshakable pull toward the stories behind the words. Your pulse quickened. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, but your attention remained trapped in the rhythm of fear encoded into print. This is not coincidence. It is the architecture of headlines engineered to move minds, to bend attention, and ultimately to control behavior. Fear is the engine of attention. The most successful media formulas exploit this truth with ruthless efficiency. Words are chosen not for clarity, but for impact. Could, might, warn, deadly, urgent. These are the incantations of the modern press. They prime the mind for alarm, creating a physiological reaction before the intellect has even processed the content. Your body acts first, your rational mind follows. Every headline is a spell, whispered across millions of screens and pages, shaping perceptions and altering decisions without explicit coercion. Psychologically, humans are wired to respond more strongly to potential threats than to abstract probabilities. Rare but dramatic events grab attention because evolution programmed us to prioritize immediate danger over slow-moving risk. The clickbait headline, "This could kill you," is not just an exaggeration. It is a carefully crafted trigger for the amygdala, the part of your brain that governs fear and survival instincts. When repeated, these triggers reinforce themselves, creating a feedback loop of anxiety, engagement, and compliance. Consider real-life examples. During the Ebola outbreak, media coverage saturated the airwaves with stories of individuals in distant continents. Isolated incidents inflated into looming global catastrophes. Fear spread faster than the virus itself. Behavioral outcomes followed predictably. Airports were emptied, products were hoarded, governments were pressured into overreaction. The headlines had achieved their purpose: control through emotion, steering millions of decisions with the invisible hand of language. Meanwhile, every day, statistically deadly risks, like influenza or car accidents, received a fraction of the attention because they lacked the sensational edge that headlines exploit. Hidden in plain sight is the insight that attention itself is a commodity, traded like gold in the modern economy. The media, advertisers, and influencers understand that clicks, views, and engagement metrics translate directly into power. Fear-based headlines are the most efficient currency. They do not just sell stories, they shape perceptions of reality. Entire political campaigns, consumer behaviors, and public health initiatives have been influenced not by facts alone, but by the emotional resonance those facts are embedded in. Directly to you, the reader. Notice how your eyes are drawn to alarm, how your body reacts before your mind comprehends. Each headline is a test, each notification a probe. By recognizing the formula, words designed to provoke, exaggerate, and manipulate, you reclaim a fragment of autonomy. Understanding the mechanism does not make the fear disappear, but it allows you to choose your response consciously rather than react reflexively. The mini-climax emerges when you see the sheer scale of orchestration. Millions of people simultaneously reacting to words carefully selected by unseen authors, their behavior steered in predictable ways. A global silent choreography enacted without force, only suggestion. Your attention, your clicks, your anxiety, these become instruments in a vast symphony of influence. You are not powerless, but the depth of the spell is humbling. Yet in the final reflection, there is a sliver of light. Headlines are mirrors, not masters. They reveal not only the dangers that media chooses to highlight, but also the vulnerabilities in human perception. Awareness is the key to liberation. By understanding the emotional formulas behind headlines, you can discern the difference between genuine threat and engineered panic. Words will always have power, but your mind can choose whether to serve the spell or resist it. In that choice lies true mastery, the ability to navigate a world designed to move you without surrendering yourself entirely to its manipulation. Next time a headline screams, "This could kill you," feel the pull, acknowledge it, and then step back. Observe the machinery at work. Your attention is yours, and no spell, however artfully cast, can touch what you consciously guard. In that pause, in that recognition, you reclaim the most precious freedom of all, the freedom of the mind. Chapter 16. Recognizing Emotional Manipulation. The room was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. Shadows stretched across the walls like ink spilled by an unseen hand. A single notification blinked on the screen. Breaking, you could be in danger or your heart skipped. Your palms felt clammy. A chill ran down your spine. You were alone, yet the words made you feel watched, vulnerable, as though the world itself had conspired to seize control of your attention and your mind. This is the theater of emotional manipulation, a stage built from fear, suggestion, and carefully crafted language. And if you do not recognize it, it is not shouting in your face, but whispering in your mind, bypassing reason, nudging your instincts. The first step in breaking its spell is recognition. Signs abound. A sudden surge of anxiety triggered by a trivial headline. A compulsion to click, share, or react before you even process the facts. A feeling that your body knows the danger before your mind does. Your affective system, the rapid, preconscious engine of emotion, is being weaponized. Psychologically, this is no accident. Human perception evolved for survival, not critical thinking in the age of information overload. Your amygdala responds instantly to perceived threats, setting your heart racing, sharpening your senses, freezing your judgment. Manipulators exploit this. By creating urgency, exaggerating consequences, and repeating alarmist messages, they hijack your effective response. Your mind is primed to obey without deliberation. Cognition is always a step behind, trying to catch up with the emotional avalanche already unleashed. Consider the social media storm following a viral health scare. A single image of a sick child, a statistic pulled out of context, a phrase like deadly outbreak. Millions react emotionally, sharing, commenting, panicking, while the rational assessment, the probability, the context, the counter-evidence lags behind, drowned in the noise. This is the architecture of manipulation. Rapid effect, delayed cognition. Your reaction becomes the tool of those who wish to influence, profit, or control. Hidden in these patterns is a surprising truth. The power to resist is within you, but it requires deliberate intervention. The pause is the most potent weapon against emotional manipulation. Slowing your response, consciously assessing the source, the intent, and the likelihood of the threat, allows cognition to reassert authority over instinct. Breathing deeply, stepping away from the screen, questioning the language and tracing the chain of emotion back to its trigger are acts of subtle rebellion against invisible influence. Directly to you, reader. Notice the tingle at the back of your neck, the tightening in your chest, the urge to click or react. That is the signal your affective system is being commandeered. Do not dismiss it. Do not fight it with denial alone. Observe it, name it, understand it. Recognition is the first spell-breaking act. By bringing manipulation into conscious awareness, you shrink its shadow. You reclaim your mind from the invisible hand that seeks to guide it without consent. The mini-climax comes in acknowledging the pervasive reach of this influence. Everywhere you look, news feeds, advertisements, conversations, emotional manipulation silently dictates what you notice, what you fear, what you act upon. The realization is disquieting. Autonomy is fragile, constantly assaulted by subtle forces you cannot see. Yet, within that disquiet lies a glimmer of empowerment. Awareness is the act of lifting the veil, of shining light into the machinery of influence, revealing its levers and pulleys. In the final reflection, recognize that emotional manipulation is not a mystical force, but a natural consequence of how minds and communication intersect. Words, images, sounds, they are tools that shape perception, sometimes with benign intent, sometimes malevolent. The choice is yours, to let effect run unchecked, or to step in, slow the pulse, and reclaim reason. Each moment of recognition is a triumph, a tiny reversal in the ongoing war for attention and obedience. Pause, breathe, observe, and reclaim. The spell is not unbreakable. It is merely unrecognized. And once recognized, you are free. Not because the world stops attempting to manipulate, but because your mind refuses to be moved without consent. In that freedom lies the essence of true mastery over the dark magic of communication. Chapter 17. Becoming a Conscious Communicator. The night was thick and suffocating, the kind of darkness that presses against your chest and whispers secrets you're not ready to hear. In that quiet, a single voice cut through. A podcast, a conversation, an email, its words carefully chosen, laden with subtle authority. You felt compelled, drawn in, almost hypnotized. And then it hit you. The power of your own words, mirrored back at you, capable of moving minds, shaping choices, and igniting fears. If words could bend you, they could bend anyone. The shadows in that room were not merely absence of light. They were the invisible forces of influence, waiting to be understood, and, if wielded carelessly, to be misused. To become a conscious communicator is to stand at the intersection of power and responsibility. Every syllable carries potential. Every sentence is a lever. Words are not neutral. They carry weight, emotion, and consequence. Ethical influence exists in the space between persuasion and coercion. It respects autonomy while guiding understanding. Manipulation, by contrast, bypasses reason, twists emotion, and thrives in ignorance. The difference is subtle, often invisible, but morally decisive. Psychologically, this requires mastery over both self and audience. Before you can influence others consciously, you must first understand your own affective triggers, biases, and impulses. Humans respond first with emotion, then with rationalization. To communicate ethically, you must anticipate these reactions without exploiting them. Awareness of the psychological landscape, cognitive shortcuts, fear responses, habitual patterns enables deliberate guidance rather than coercion. Consider the corporate leader who inspires action through vision rather than threat. The parent who teaches caution without instilling panic. The teacher who encourages curiosity without shaming mistakes. These are examples of influence rooted in consciousness, not manipulation. Real-life scenarios reveal the subtlety of this practice. Take a public health campaign. When a disease outbreak occurs, fear is real and justified. The challenge is to communicate urgency without exaggerating danger or creating unnecessary panic. A video showing children in harm's way may motivate protective behavior, but overemphasized, it can paralyze misdirect attention and erode trust. Similarly, a political speech that leverages anxiety about security can rally support. But when fear is amplified beyond reality, it becomes a tool of control. The conscious communicator navigates this terrain with awareness and ethical calibration, balancing clarity, impact, and respect. Hidden within this practice is a surprising truth. Responsibility amplifies effectiveness. People are more receptive to influence when they sense honesty, empathy, and deliberate care. Ethical communication does not dilute power. It enhances it, creating engagement that is sustainable, trust that is resilient, and decisions that are informed rather than coerced. The most potent communicators are those who recognize the duality of their craft. Words can heal, inspire, and awaken, or they can wound, frighten, and dominate. Directly to you, reader. The power you hold is invisible but immense. Every conversation, message, and public statement is a vector of influence. Pause and consider. Are you shaping, understanding, or bending will? Are you amplifying justified caution or fanning irrational fear? Your responsibility is to wield language consciously, understanding that your voice can be a beacon of clarity or a conduit of manipulation. The mini-climax emerges when you confront the gravity of this power. To speak is to act. To act without awareness is to risk harm. Every word carries weight. Every phrase a ripple across the minds of others. Recognizing this is unsettling, but in that tension lies liberation. Liberation, because you can choose restraint, intention, and ethical impact. The realization that words are magical does not paralyze, it empowers. In the final reflection, understand that conscious communication is not a formula, but a philosophy, a commitment to integrity, empathy, and awareness. The spell of manipulation is broken, not by escaping influence, but by embracing responsibility. Fear, persuasion, and emotion will always be present. They are the medium of human interaction. The choice lies in how they are directed, to dominate or to illuminate, to control or to empower. Mastery of words is mastery of influence. Mastery of influence is mastery of self. And in that mastery, you step fully into the role of a conscious communicator, a guardian of minds, and a wielder of language, whose magic is used with wisdom, not malice. Chapter 18. Immunity to Dark Communication. The rain fell in heavy sheets that night, each drop like a tiny hammer striking the roof, a rhythm both chaotic and precise. In a dim apartment, lit only by the flicker of a television, a man sat frozen, eyes locked on the screen. The news anchor's voice, calm yet urgent, wove a web of fear around him. A storm of statistics, warnings, and vivid images of calamity. His heart raced. Thoughts scrambled, and somewhere, deep inside, a small, rational voice whispered, "This is designed to move me, not inform me." Yet it was drowned almost imperceptibly by the pounding pulse of emotion. He was under a spell invisible but powerful. Dark communication thrives in moments like these. It is subtle, insidious, and relentless. It hijacks the mind through the pathways evolution built for survival. The amygdala, the gut, the body that responds before thought can catch up. Immunity is not about shutting off feeling. It is about training perception to discern signal from noise. Emotional awareness becomes the armor, a protective lens that filters fear from fact. Without it, every message, every headline, every whispered rumor is a potential manipulator. The core idea is deceptively simple. To resist the pull of dark communication, you must first recognize it in action. Emotional manipulation is rarely overt. It is in the framing of a story, the selective highlighting of danger, the cadence of a speaker's voice, a repeated phrase, a shocking image, a loaded metaphor. These are spells disguised as information. Awareness begins with observation. Noticing your body's reactions, labeling the sensations without judgment, and tracing them back to their source. Are you reacting to the reality of the event or to the emotional architecture built around it? Psychologically, the challenge is profound. Humans evolved to respond to threat signals automatically. Our brains are wired for survival, not skepticism. Fear narrows attention, exaggerates risk, and primes compliance. This biological wiring is exploited by marketers, politicians, media outlets, and even peers. The immunized mind learns to pause, to separate effect from evidence, instinct from insight. It becomes a conscious observer of its own emotional life, refusing to act as an unthinking puppet. Consider real-life scenarios. An individual scrolling through social media sees a headline screaming disaster. Without awareness, the heart jumps, adrenaline spikes, and the mind conjures vivid scenarios. This reaction is instantaneous, pre-verbal, primal. With emotional training, the same individual notices the physical cues, tightened chest, quickened breath, pauses and asks, what is the actual likelihood? What is being emphasized and why? The difference is subtle but profound. One path leads to anxiety, distorted priorities, and vulnerability. The other leads to clarity, composure, and strategic response. Hidden within this practice is a counterintuitive truth. The more attuned we are to our emotional responses, the freer we become. Emotional awareness does not numb experience. It amplifies discernment. It allows us to feel fully without being manipulated. Separating signal from noise is not just a cognitive exercise. It is a form of liberation. In a world where attention is currency and fear is a commodity, immunity becomes a radical act. Living outside the fear economy means cultivating patience, skepticism, and reflective distance, even in the presence of urgent messaging designed to provoke. Directly to you, reader, your mind is a battleground. Every conversation, news alert, and advertisement is a vector of influence. Ask yourself, are your reactions truly your own, or have they been orchestrated? Notice the subtle pressures to conform, to panic, to comply, to comply. Step back, breathe, and name the emotion before it directs you. In doing so, you reclaim agency. Your attention, once hijacked, becomes a tool of deliberate choice. The mini-climax emerges when you confront the cost of inattention. Every unexamined fear is a doorway. Every impulsive reaction, a chain. To resist is not passive. It requires effort, vigilance, and courage. But in that tension lies power. The spell of dark communication only works if you remain unconscious. Awareness is the antidote. In the final reflection, understand this. Immunity to manipulation is not a state you achieve once. It is a practice, a daily cultivation of self-awareness, emotional literacy, and ethical discernment. The world will always seek to move your mind, stir your fears, and shape your choices. But the conscious communicator, the emotionally attuned individual, is no longer prey. Words remain magical, but now you are the guardian of your own mind. You live not as a passive target of influence, but as an active participant in your reality. A mind trained to see through shadows, and a heart strong enough to navigate them. Conclusion: mastery without malice. The candle flickered, throwing shadows across the walls of the empty study, long and jagged like the fingers of unseen specters. Outside, the wind howled through the streets, carrying the faint echo of voices, some urgent, some pleading, all insistent. In the flickering light, a book lay open, its pages brimming with the spells of language, the silent incantations that shape reality and bend minds. You, the reader, have walked its corridors, stared into the dark magic that lurks within words, and now stand at the threshold of understanding. What comes next is both simple and terrifying. Mastery without malice. Words will always hold power. They will twist perception, stir fear, or kindle hope. They will build realities in the minds of others, sometimes unseen, sometimes unbidden. To think that communication is ever neutral is to ignore centuries of psychological evidence in human behavior. Every conversation, every headline, every whispered rumor is a vector of influence, an opportunity to illuminate or to dominate. The choice always rests with the communicator. Awareness is your ultimate shield. At its core, mastery without malice begins with self-awareness. Consider the mechanics you have learned. The invisible threads of fear that pull attention, the subtle framing that creates perceived urgency, the repetition that forges belief. To manipulate knowingly is to step into a dark art. To observe and choose consciously is to claim freedom. Recognize when language is attempting to control, when emotion overrides reason, when attention is being sold as a commodity. Step back, pause, question. The mind that notices its own susceptibility is no longer a puppet but a participant. Psychologically, the implications are profound. Every story you have encountered in this book, every case of media-induced panic, every subtle social manipulation, illustrates the fragility of conscious thought under effective pressure. But you now know the counterbalance: deliberate reflection, emotional labeling, cognitive pause. These are your tools. They do not erase the magic of words. They temper it, channel it, illuminate it for both yourself and others. Real-life application is crucial. Imagine a workplace scenario. A manager issues instructions that on the surface seem innocuous, but the cadence, the repetition, the selective emphasis instills anxiety, urgency, and compliance without explicit command. A skilled communicator aware of the mechanics recognizes the psychological currents at play. They speak with intention, not coercion. They cultivate clarity, not confusion, cooperation, not fear. This is the art of ethical mastery, influencing minds while honoring autonomy. Hidden within this practice are surprising truths. You do not need to dominate to have influence. In fact, influence without dominance is often stronger, more enduring. Words that illuminate provoke understanding, empathy, and action that is chosen freely. Language can be used as a torch in the darkness rather than a lever to bend others to your will. And the deeper insight is this: mastery over communication begins with mastery over yourself, your attention, your fear, your reactions. Once you hold that power, you can navigate the world without being dragged by unseen string. Directly to you, reader. The temptation to use knowledge for control will always exist. You have glimpsed the shadows that lurk behind language, the levers of fear, the architecture of perception. Use it carefully. Remember that your mind is a conduit, not merely a target. Speak to enlighten, to clarify, to awaken understanding. Pause before words leave your lips. Consider the unseen effects they may have. Ethical communication is not weakness, it is strength. It is the deliberate choice to wield power without causing harm, to shape reality with intention, not manipulation. The mini-climax of mastery without malice occurs in the everyday moments. In a conversation where panic could have been sown but was replaced by clarity. In a message that could have incited obedience but instead nurtured reflection. In the news you consume and the stories you tell, chosen with awareness. Each is a small victory against the pervasive spell of fear, against the subtle domination of language that seeks to move minds unconsciously. In these moments, you are no longer prey. You are an agent of conscious influence. In the final reflection, understand this. Communication will never lose its power. Fear will never stop trying to guide behavior. Minds will always be quietly moved, often without notice, but awareness transforms vulnerability into agency. By observing, questioning, and choosing, you can live outside the shadow of manipulation. You can speak with intention, illuminate with words, and guide without coercion. Mastery without malice is not a destination. It is a practice, a lifelong cultivation of clarity, empathy, and ethical vigilance. It is the final spell, not to bend others, but to free yourself, and in doing so, offer freedom to those who hear you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find it helpful. Your support means everything and helps this channel grow and reach more people. And if you'd like to go even further in supporting the channel, consider joining as a member to get exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights. Stay curious, stay powerful, and I'll see you in the next one.